Isabella Gray was ordered to give away her groom before the whole pack. Her mother wept as if Isabella were the thief. Her brother called the theft mercy, and every elder nodded. The great hall of Grayhold smelled of wet fur, pine smoke, and old judgment. Winter pressed its white face against the arrow slits. Banners snapped above the hearth, each one stitched with a gray wolf and a broken crown. Isabella stood beneath them in a plain blue gown, her hands folded so tightly her nails bit skin. No one asked why blood rose in her palms. They were too busy watching Emily Gray tremble beside the dais. Emily had been found at dawn, or so the servants kept whispering. Years among humans had left her thin, pale, and wrapped in a border cloak. Her voice was soft enough to make blame sound cruel. William Gray, heir to the Northern Gray pack, stepped before the council table. He did not look at Isabella first. He looked at Emily, then at their mother, then at the elders who liked grief when it cost them nothing. His voice rang against the stone. Emily suffered in the human lands while we slept under our own roof. What can repay that wound? Let Isabella yield her blood betrothal to Richard Hawke. Let our lost daughter have honor at last. A murmur passed through the hall. It moved like a crack in lake ice. First one elder lowered his chin, then another. Then Isabella's mother pressed a cloth to her mouth and sobbed. "My poor child," she whispered. She meant Emily. She never looked at Isabella. Richard Hawke had belonged to Isabella's future since childhood. Their fathers sealed the match beneath a full moon, with silver blades laid flat across a wolfskin altar. The Hawke lands lay south of Silvermoon Forest, where warmer streams cut through black earth. A marriage between Gray and Hawke would hold the old road, the salt wagons, and the winter hunting rights. Isabella had learned those facts before she learned how to braid her hair. She had also learned that a promise in a wolf hall was never only a promise. It was border law. Such promises stored food against famine and gave the right to call warriors when raiders crossed frozen rivers. Yet William spoke of it as if it were a ribbon he could lift from one sister and pin to another. That insult cut deeper than losing Richard. It made Isabella sound like furniture in her own life. Emily lifted her lashes at exactly the right moment. Her eyes were damp, dark, and frightened. "I could never take what belongs to my sister," she said. The words were gentle. The scent beneath them was not. Isabella caught it through the smoke, a sour flicker of fear and hunger, gone before anyone else breathed in. Their mother rushed to Emily and folded her in both arms. "You are too good," she cried. "You were stolen from us and still think of others." William turned then, his jaw hard with borrowed righteousness. "Isabella," he said, "this is your chance to show the blood in your veins." The hall waited. Isabella heard servants shift near the doors. She heard the old hounds breathing under the benches. She heard snow slide from the roof in a soft white rush. If she refused, they would call her selfish. If she agreed, they would call her dutiful and forget she had ever wanted anything. The elders pretended this was a tender question, yet every chair had been arranged before Isabella entered. Lord Carden sat with the marriage records already open. Dame Ruth held a quill. The priestess had brought the red bowl used for oath revisions. A council does not gather tools by accident. Isabella's father sat beneath the carved wolf heads, heavy with silence. He was not a cruel man in public. That made his failure harder to name. He studied the table as if the grain of the wood contained a better daughter. When Isabella looked at him, he rubbed his brow and said nothing. Emily's shoulders shook inside her borrowed cloak. The cloak belonged to William, and everyone saw it. It told the hall she had a protector before anyone judged the claim. Isabella understood stagecraft when she saw it. Her sister had returned from human lands with more than scars. A young guard near the doors stared at Isabella with pity. Pity angered her more than scorn. Scorn at least admitted there was a fight. Pity buried her before she had fallen. She lifted her chin until the guard looked away. William asked for her answer, not their father's answer, not Richard's answer, hers. He wanted consent wrapped around coercion, because stolen things shine cleaner when the robbed hand signs the receipt. That was how old power worked. It leaned until a person mistook bending for peace. In blood and debt, the next break became visible. Grayhold had never been kind to second daughters who remembered numbers. Isabella remembered everything. She remembered her grandmother's hands guiding hers over a ledger. She remembered which tenant paid in barley, which paid in hides, and which widow needed another week before winter rents came due. Her father admired that memory when it helped him. Her mother disliked it when it revealed favorites. Emily had vanished at 6 during the frost fair. The whole northern road had searched for her. Torches burned along the ravines for 10 nights, and 3 scouts died crossing a river crusted with moon ice. After that, grief became a room no one cleaned. Her mother kept Emily's cup on the table. William sharpened his grief into rank. Isabella became the child still present, which meant she could be blamed for every empty chair. When she was 9, she asked why Emily's winter cloak stayed by the hearth while hers had holes in both sleeves. Her mother slapped her so quickly the servants froze. "A lost child feels cold forever," her mother said. "A living child can endure." Isabella learned that day how unfairness hides inside noble speech. Her grandmother, Lady Maravale, was the only one who did not worship absence. She lived beyond the mist pine woods on a small northern estate most maps ignored. When she visited Grayhold, she brought ironwood combs, dried berries, and a listening silence that did not demand gratitude. "You are not less because others look past you," she once told Isabella. "A wolf still has teeth in the dark." Before Mara died, she placed a folded deed inside Isabella's sewing chest. It named a neglected manor, 3 cold fields, a spring, and forest rights along the northern ridge. "If there comes a day with no door left open," Mara whispered, "go there. Stone can be mended. A bent spirit must be taken away from hands that enjoy bending it." For years, every feast had left an empty place for Emily. Her cup was polished, her chair was dusted. On feast nights, Isabella sat beside a ghost who received more tenderness than she did. If she laughed too loudly, her mother flinched. If she asked for more bread, servants glanced at the empty chair. William had loved Isabella once, before grief made him important. As children, he let her ride behind him on his first wolf mount. After Emily vanished, adults praised his solemn face. They called him strong. They called him the son who carried the pack's sorrow. He learned that pain could become power when displayed correctly. Mara Vale saw the change and disliked it. She told Isabella that houses rot when grief becomes law. At 10, Isabella did not understand. At 20, standing in the hall while elders traded her future, she understood too well. The manor deed had seemed like a fairy gift when Isabella first touched it. Then life closed over the thought. She locked it away and tried to earn love where she had been born. Hope can be stubborn in neglected children. It keeps presenting evidence to judges who have already ruled. Richard had once seemed different from the rest. As a boy, he sent Isabella hawk feathers from the southern cliffs. At 14, he swore he would never let council politics bruise her. At 16, he kissed her knuckles beside the blood moon bonfire and called her his northern star. She believed him because belief is easy before it costs anything. Then Emily returned, and Richard changed before the ashes cooled. He rode into Grayhold with 6 hawk guards, polished boots, and a face arranged for sorrow. Isabella met him in the courtyard, where churned snow had turned gray under hooves. He held her shoulders and asked if she was well. His eyes had already gone beyond her, searching the windows for Emily. Later, in the old chapel passage, he found Isabella alone. The torches made his shadow longer than his body. "Your sister has endured more than any noblewoman should," he said. "You know what people will say if you fight this." Isabella asked what he would say. Richard looked away. "You could yield with grace," he told her. The sentence was quiet, almost tender. That made it worse. He did not command her. He asked her to help him betray her and call it kindness. For a breath, Isabella saw the boy with hawk feathers. Then she smelled southern cedar on his cloak and beneath it Emily's skin. The scent was faint. It should not have been there. Noble daughters did not embrace promised men in hidden corridors. Lost sisters did not carry the warmth of another woman's betrothed. Isabella said nothing. Her silence saved Richard from shame that day. It also gave her the first clear thread of truth. Richard had a handsome face made for forgiveness. That was dangerous. People wanted to believe his mistakes were misunderstandings because his smile made blame feel ungenerous. Isabella had once been one of those people. She had defended his pride, his lateness, his easy jealousy, and called all of it youth. After Emily's return, he visited the sick room too often. He said he brought news from the south because human towns might comfort her. His mother had sent a shawl, or so he claimed. Pity, he added, was natural for any wolf girl forced to hide her nature among men. Each reason could stand alone. Together they formed a path. Isabella began noticing small thefts. Richard no longer reached for her hand before crossing courtyards. He no longer asked her opinion on border patrols. When she spoke, he answered after a pause, as if translating her from a language he had stopped studying. The night she smelled Emily on his cloak, Isabella walked to the armory and stood among spears until anger cooled. She wanted to break something. Instead, she counted weapons. Numbers steadied her: 34 ash spears, 12 silvered blades, one future cracking without sound. Emily learned the household faster than a spy. She fainted before the aunt who distrusted bloodless faces. Near the nursery, she woke screaming where old women could hear. Whenever Isabella entered a room, Emily shivered yet clung to her sleeve when witnesses gathered. Every gesture trapped Isabella twice. Pull away, and she was cruel. Stay, and Emily looked brave for enduring her. The bathing chamber became her neatest trap. Emily asked for lavender water after supper, then sent the maid away with a whisper that she wanted only her sister near. When Isabella entered, steam clouded the blue tiles and one copper bucket lay overturned beside the tub. Emily was standing in her shift, shaking hard enough to make the water tremble. Before Isabella could ask what happened, the maid returned with William behind her. Emily clutched her own wrist, where 5 red marks had already been pressed into the skin. She begged them not to blame Isabella. That plea did the work accusation would have spoiled. One night, Emily's cry split the corridor. Servants ran with lamps. William arrived barefoot, sword in hand. Their mother stumbled after him, hair unbound and face wild. They found Emily curled beneath the window, whispering that she had dreamed of cages and human men with iron hooks. Isabella stood in her doorway across the hall, still holding the book she had been reading. Emily saw her and flinched. "Forgive me, sister," she whispered. "I know you hate hearing me cry." The servants stared at Isabella. William's mouth tightened. Their mother gathered Emily like a wounded pup. No one noticed the window latch had been opened from inside. No one noticed the candle had been placed to throw Emily's shadow across Isabella's threshold. By morning, the story changed. Isabella resented Emily's pain. They said she wanted silence. Worse, they claimed she feared losing Richard more than she loved blood. The keep repeated it while kneading bread, brushing horses, and carrying water. A lie becomes weather when enough people breathe it. Isabella stopped defending herself in public. Defense fed the tale. Instead, she listened. One maid carried letters south. Richard's guards changed posts near the orchard wall. Emily liked to be seen fainting, but never falling hard enough to bruise. The girl had suffered among humans. That part was likely true. Yet suffering had not made her gentle. It had taught her where soft voices could cut. The truth had edges Isabella could not ignore. Emily knew how to flinch because someone had taught her fear. Once, while crossing the upper gallery, Isabella saw her sister stop before a tapestry showing hunters with iron hooks. Emily's face emptied. Her breath came thin and fast. For one unguarded moment, there was no audience and no performance. Isabella almost stepped forward. Then Emily saw a maid approaching, let the fear remain on her face, and whispered that Isabella had followed her too closely. The maid carried that version downstairs before the dinner bells rang. That was when Isabella understood the danger clearly. Emily did not invent all her wounds. She spent them. Real pain became coin in her hand, and she used it to buy protection, pity, and power. The knowledge made Isabella's anger heavier, not lighter. A stranger's cruelty had shaped Emily, but Emily still chose where to point the blade that shape had given her. The worst part was not that Emily lied. It was how well the lies used truths. She had been hurt and had known hunger. Loud male voices truly startled her, and dreams still woke her sweating. Real pain gave weight to every false accusation. People rarely examine a wound for a hidden knife. One afternoon, Isabella brought broth because their mother ordered it. Emily touched the bowl and whispered that the smell reminded her of a human cellar. Her face drained. The maid gasped. Isabella carried the bowl away while the hall filled with blame thick enough to chew. Another day, Emily asked to see the old nursery. She clutched Isabella's arm all the way there. Before witnesses, she thanked her for being brave enough to share their mother again. Share. The word made servants sigh. Isabella felt herself being reduced to an obstacle in a story about healing. William guarded Emily as if guarding her excused every other failure. He had not found her when she vanished. He had not saved her from the human lands. Now he saved her from imagined cruelty and called that redemption. Isabella became the enemy he could defeat. A lesser wound might have faded there, but this one had roots. In Emily's theater, the next break became visible. The truth came from a stable boy with frostbitten ears. His name was Tom, and he owed Isabella his left hand. Years before, William had ordered him whipped for losing a saddle strap during a storm. Isabella found the strap under a wagon axle and stopped the punishment. Tom never thanked her aloud. Gratitude in Grayhold could make a servant a target. He waited until moonset and left a folded note beneath her saddle blanket. South Border Town, it read. Hawk Cloak, Gray Lady, Midwinter Inn, child sent. Isabella burned the note after reading it twice. Then she rode alone to the Falcon Mews and asked old Nessa what rumors flew faster than birds. Nessa had kept hawks since Isabella was born. Her face looked carved from walnut, and her eyes missed nothing worth selling. She spat into the straw when Isabella named the border town. Men in love think inn walls are blind, she said. A hawk lordling kept a room there for weeks. A pale northern girl came after dusk, paid in gray silver. Isabella felt no heat, only a cold and exact stillness. She asked if the girl carried sickness. Nessa snorted. Not sickness. A pup. Early, but there. Wolves know. Even old women know when a young mother hides her middle under borrowed wool. The world narrowed to one clean point. Richard had not been stolen by pity. Emily had returned carrying his secret. William's proposal was not mercy. It was a rescue staged for two lovers who needed Isabella to step aside before the child betrayed them. Their mother might have been fooled. The elders might have been lazy. Richard and Emily were neither. Tom's note was not enough for accusation, but it was enough for pursuit. Isabella had been raised among wolves who scented fear, blood, lust, illness, and lies. Noble law still demanded objects, dates, and witnesses. Instinct opened the door. Evidence carried you through it. The border inn had a painted sign showing a cracked bell. Isabella had seen it once from a carriage window. It served humans, lone wolves, smugglers, and travelers who preferred not to explain their names. If Richard wanted secrecy, he had chosen well. If he wanted honor, he had chosen badly. Nessa did not give the rest freely. She made Isabella climb the narrow ladder to the upper mews, where hawks shifted on their perches and stared with bright, offended eyes. The old woman opened a drawer beneath the feed table and removed 3 scraps of travel paper tied with black thread. One bore the cracked bell mark of the border inn. One listed the price of a private room paid in gray silver. The last was only a torn corner, but Richard's crest had pressed deep into the wax. I kept them because young men with banners are fools, Nessa said. Fools become lords if no one saves proof. Isabella touched the papers with 2 fingers. The mews smelled of feathers, old blood, and cold air. Outside, Grayhold's towers rose white against the morning. Inside, Isabella felt the first firm ground beneath her since Emily's return. Nessa's hawks had seen the southern road all winter. So had Nessa. Old servants survive by knowing which secrets are worth keeping until the price is right. Isabella paid in coin, but Nessa accepted because she had liked Lady Mara. Dead women with good reputations still buy favors. When Isabella learned of the pup, she did not hate the child. That surprised her. The child had not stolen anything. It was only proof with a heartbeat. Her anger turned toward the adults who had built a cradle out of her broken promise. Isabella chose dawn because liars hate pale light. Richard's camp stood beyond the eastern gate, where hawk banners hung stiff with frost. His men were eating barley cakes beside low fires. They rose when Isabella passed. No one stopped her. A promised bride still carried rank, even one marked for surrender. Richard was fastening his sword belt when she entered his tent. He smiled too quickly. Bella, he said. He had not used that name since Emily returned. Isabella disliked hearing it from a mouth that had learned new lies. She set 3 objects on his traveling chest: a strip of border-in linen, a silver coin stamped with the gray wolf, and a small hawk feather tied in Emily's blue thread. The color left his face. She watched it go. Then she told him each fact in order. She named the room in the mixed town, the visits after dusk, and the servant paid to carry letters. Last came the pup beneath Emily's heart. Her voice stayed flat like a frozen lake under snow. Richard tried anger first. He asked who had poisoned her against her own sister. Grief, he said, had made her suspicious. Emily needed protection from women who had never known hunger. Isabella let each sentence die. Then she stepped close enough for him to smell her certainty. "Do not insult me with virtue," she said. "You bedded my sister while wearing my blood mark. Now you will marry her in full hawk right. Before every northern pack you will call her your lawful wife. If you hide her as a shame, I will show your father the proof, and let him decide whether a son who breaks blood oaths can inherit." Richard's wolf rose in his eyes. Gold burned under the brown. For one breath, the tent felt too small for both their tempers. Then his gaze dropped to the feather. He knew what wolves knew. A pup's scent could be masked from humans, not from blood kin. His anger cracked into fear. "You would ruin Emily," he said. Isabella almost laughed. "No, I am saving her from the shadows you chose. I am also saving myself from a man who asks his victim to carry his honor." Her words struck him harder than any slap. He had expected tears and prepared for pleading. Disgust left him with no weapon ready. Outside Richard's tent, hawkmen pretended not to listen. Canvas is a poor wall for noble ruin. Isabella knew every word might travel before noon. That suited her. A private shame had been forced into her public life. Let a public answer carry back. Richard's first mistake was calling her Bella. His second was reaching for her wrist. She stepped back before his fingers closed. "Do not touch me with hands that learned my sister in secret," she said. He recoiled as if she had struck him. He tried to claim love was complicated. Isabella answered that hunger was often complicated to the hungry. Vows were not. A blood mark did not become unclear because a man found pity beautiful in lamplight. When she named the pup, Richard sat down. The movement was small and final. All the lordly shape left him. He became a frightened son, measuring his father's wrath, his lover's tears, and the inheritance he might lose. Isabella left him with one mercy and one threat: marry her openly, and I will not speak more than needed. Hide her, and I will speak until even the southern crows know. Richard understood both. Men like him often understand consequences after they fail to understand honor. Isabella learned to measure people by what they did when no crowd watched. In the tent, the next break became visible. The blood bond was broken under the full moon. The ceremony took place in the same stone ring where their fathers had sealed it. Snow lay between the standing stones like white wool. Torches burned blue at the tips because silver dust had been thrown into the pitch. Every elder came. Scandal always drew a better crowd than justice. Richard stood beside Emily. She wore gray silk and a veil too thin for the cold. One hand rested near her stomach whenever she forgot herself. Their mother watched that hand with dawning terror. William watched the elders. He cared less about truth than about how truth would be recorded. Isabella cut her palm first. Blood welled dark against moonlight. Richard cut his next. The priestess held a silver thread between them, chanted the old words, then burned the thread in a bowl of pine resin. When the smoke rose, Isabella felt a pressure lift from her ribs. It was not grief, it was space. The priestess asked whether any debt remained. Richard swallowed. Emily's eyes shone with panic. Isabella could have named the child before everyone. She could have made her mother faint and William rage and Richard kneel. Instead, she said only this: "No debt remains if Lord Hawke announces his new bride before the next moon." The elders heard the blade beneath the velvet. Richard's father heard it too. Lord Hawke was a narrow man with a silver beard and a mind like locked iron. He looked at his son, then at Emily, then at Isabella's unshaking hand. By sunrise, messengers rode south with wedding notices. Mercy had become a cage Richard could not refuse. The priestess had old eyes and no patience for theater. She had bound enough couples to know when a vow died before the cord burned. When she saw Isabella's steady hand, something like approval crossed her face. It vanished quickly, but Isabella kept it. Emily tried to weep during the chant. The cold made it difficult. Her tears clung to her lashes and glittered. A year earlier, Isabella might have felt guilt. That night she felt distance. Emily's tears were no longer weather inside her chest. Richard's blood smoked in the silver bowl. Isabella watched the red thread darken, curl, and vanish. There was pain, yes. Old promises do not leave without taking skin, but beneath the pain lay relief so sharp it frightened her. When Lord Hawke ordered the public notices, William's face changed. He had wanted a quiet transfer. He had wanted Isabella blamed, Emily pitied, and Richard preserved. Isabella's condition forced the hidden shape into daylight. Daylight was not kind to it. Isabella left before the keep woke. She took no gowns with gray colors. She packed ledgers, winter boots, her grandmother's deed, 3 knives, 2 blankets, a pouch of coin, and every jewel she had earned or been given by someone now dead. Gifts from Richard stayed behind. Let Emily inherit his tokens. Isabella wanted nothing that carried his scent. Her mount was a silver maned she-wolf named Brine. Brine had been born mean, which Isabella respected. The wolf hated most hands and tolerated hers. Together they crossed the lower yard while frost silvered the troughs. The gate guard pretended not to see the lady leaving with saddlebags heavy enough for exile. At the last arch, William stepped from the guardroom. He wore no cloak. His breath smoked in the dark. "Running makes you look guilty," he said. Isabella kept one hand on Brine's ruff. "Staying made all of you look innocent," she answered. "That was worse." William's face tightened. He said she would shame their mother. Emily needed peace, he insisted. Grayhold could not endure another public wound. Isabella listened until he ran out of family words for political fear. Then she asked one question. "When did you learn about the pup?" His silence answered. It was brief, but it was enough. William had known before the council. He had not acted from grief alone. He had calculated. A pregnant Emily tied to Richard could still serve Grey power if Isabella surrendered quietly. A ruined Emily would stain William's future rule, so he offered his living sister as payment. "Get out of my path," Isabella said. Her voice was low. Brine's hackles lifted. William looked at the wolf, then at the gate, then at the pale edge of dawn. He moved aside. Isabella rode through without looking back. Behind her, Grayhold sank into snow and smoke, a home shaped like a verdict. Packing taught Isabella what remained true: her grandmother's deed, her own coin, practical clothes, a knife balanced for her hand. The rest was smoke. She left gowns her mother liked, ribbons Richard praised, and every ornament chosen to make her acceptable to a hall that had sold her. The corridor outside her room seemed longer that morning. She passed Emily's door. A lamp burned inside. For one breath, Isabella thought her sister might call out, might confess, might thank her for turning scandal into marriage. No sound came. Silence answered silence. William at the gate looked less like a brother than a toll collector. He demanded an emotional price before allowing passage. Isabella had paid too many such tolls. She refused this one. When she asked about the pup, William's scent sharpened. A wolf can school his face better than his blood. Betrayal rarely arrives alone. It brings witnesses, planners, and cowards who later call themselves helpless. That small fact mattered more than anyone in Grayhold would have understood. In leaving, the next break became visible. Before the first village, Isabella stopped at a shrine where travelers left wolf teeth, copper pins, and strips of wool for safe passage. She had nothing small enough to spare, so she cut a blue thread from her sleeve and tied it to the frozen branch above the stone. The shrine was old, older than Grayhold's pride. Human hands and wolf hands had both worn the offering bowl smooth. That comforted her. The world was wider than the laws used to corner her. At the charcoal village, a child followed Brine at a careful distance and asked whether noble ladies always rode wolves that hated everyone. Isabella said only the wise ones did. The child considered this, then gave Brine half a blackened oatcake. Brine accepted it with grave contempt. Isabella laughed for the first time since leaving the keep, and the sound startled her enough to make her look over her shoulder. No one punished it, no one claimed it. It vanished into the cold like breath. The road north was older than Grayhold. Roman stones lay buried beneath wolf tracks, traitor ruts, and black pine needles. Villages thinned after the second day. Roofs grew lower, windows grew smaller. Men crossed themselves when Brine passed, though they still bowed to Isabella's ring. In the borderlands, manors survived longer than comfort. At night she slept in ruined watch huts or under leaning firs. Brine curled around her feet. The cold pressed through wool and memory. Sometimes Isabella woke reaching for a hearth that was no longer hers. Then she remembered the council hall, Emily's trembling mouth, Richard's lowered eyes, and William blocking the gate. Grief dried quickly after that. On the fourth day, human bandits followed her from a charcoal village. They thought one woman with one wolf meant easy prey. That mistake ended beside a frozen ford. Brine hamstrung the first horse. Isabella threw a knife into the second man's sleeve and pinned him to a birch. She let the third run back with a message. Noble women traveling alone are not always lost. The encounter steadied her. Fear had narrowed the road. Action widened it. She cleaned her knife in snow, fed Brine dried venison, and rode until the stars came out like chips of bone. The northern sky did not pity anyone. Isabella found that honest. Cold remade the land as she rode. Streams wore glass. Pines held snow in their black arms. Crows followed for a mile, then left when she proved neither corpse nor fool. Isabella liked the road's blunt questions. Could she stay warm? Could she find water? Could she keep moving? At a shepherd's hut, a woman sold her oatcakes and asked no questions. That kindness was plain and paid for. Isabella found comfort in the simplicity. She had grown tired of gifts that demanded pieces of her in return. The bandits at the ford carried human knives and wolf charms bought from hedge priests. Their leader called her sweetheart. That was his last complete sentence before Brine hit his horse. Isabella did not kill them because corpses attract officials and waste daylight. Afterward, she shook for 10 minutes. Not from fear alone, from recognition. She could protect herself outside Grayhold more easily than inside it. Enemies with knives were cleaner than family with tears. Mara's manor appeared at dusk on the 6th day. At first, Isabella saw only mist between the pines. Then a roofline emerged, steep and dark, bowed under snow. A broken stone wall circled the yard. The gate hung from one hinge. The wolf sheds stood empty, their doors banging softly in the wind. For a moment, Isabella felt the full weight of what she had chosen. This was no secret paradise. It was a ruin with legal papers. The well rope had rotted. The orchard trees were tangled with thorn. Smoke had not touched the chimney in years. A woman could freeze here while calling herself free. Then Brine pushed her head against Isabella's shoulder. The gesture was impatient, not tender. "Move," it said. So Isabella moved. She cleared a path through the yard, forced the front door, and found the main room full of dust, mouse tracks, and a hearth wide enough to roast a stag. Under the ash lay old coals, black but dry. The next 3 days stripped romance from exile. The chimney smoked whenever the wind turned east. The pantry door stuck so badly Isabella had to kick it open with her heel. A fox had nested in the lower cupboard and left bones behind. Brine found a rat beneath the stairs and handled it with a crunch that made Isabella decide not to inspect the corner too closely. Still, every ugly task gave her back a piece of herself. She dragged ruined rushes from the floor and burned them in the yard. She scraped soot from the hearthstones until her wrists ached. She found her grandmother's old measuring rod behind the kitchen beam, each mark carved for grain, cloth, and timber. Holding it felt like taking counsel from the dead. Mara had not left her comfort. She had left her tools. By midnight, a small fire lived. By dawn, Isabella had swept one corner, patched the lower window with oiled cloth, and hung her grandmother's iron key from a nail above the mantel. The manor did not welcome her. It tested her. That was acceptable. Tests could be answered. Contempt could only be endured or escaped. Inside the manor, old dust held her grandmother's scent faintly under rot and cold stone. That almost brought Isabella to her knees. She touched the mantel, the doorframe, the cracked table. Mara had stood here. Mara had thought of her here. Love could leave evidence, too. The first fire smoked horribly. Isabella coughed until her eyes streamed. She laughed then, a raw sound in the empty room. Freedom smelled like ash, mold, and stubborn pine at first. It was still better than Grayhold's polished suffocation. By daylight, she found a storeroom full of broken tools and one good axe. Damp had ruined the seed jars. A chest of linens wrapped in cedar survived by luck. Every discovery became a choice. Repair, burn, keep, begin. That night, wind moved through cracks in the wall. Isabella slept with a knife under her hand and brine against the door. The house groaned like an old creature waking. She whispered to it that they would both have to try. Sebastian Foster arrived the next morning with split wood, salt venison, and 3 silent men. Isabella saw them from the yard, where she was trying to drag a fallen gatepost through crusted snow. The stranger rode a dark wolf almost as large as brine. His cloak was plain brown, his boots were scarred, and his silver-gray eyes missed nothing. He dismounted before speaking. "Lady Gray," he said, "my grandfather served Lady Mara. Mine is the neighboring holding beyond the East Ridge. She asked our line to watch this land if you ever came." Isabella kept both hands visible. "My grandmother has been dead 5 years." Sebastian nodded. "A true debt outlives the mouth that made it." His men stacked wood without waiting for permission. One repaired the gate hinge. Another carried venison to the kitchen table and left it wrapped in clean cloth. Sebastian stayed outside the threshold, which Isabella noticed. Men who meant to claim gratitude usually stepped in before being invited. He did not. "I can pay," she said. He looked at the broken wall, the dead well rope, and the smoke leaking from a crack in the chimney. Then he looked back at her. "Pay later, if pride requires it. Survive first." The words were blunt, almost rude. They were also the first practical kindness she had received in months. Sebastian's silence had weight, but not pressure. That distinction mattered. Grayhold's silence had demanded that Isabella guess wrong and apologize. His silence left room for thought. He waited while she studied his men, his wolf, and the cart of supplies. He had known Lady Mara as a child, he said. She taught him to set snares without cruelty and to read weather by pine smoke. She also boxed his ear once for mocking a tenant's accent. Isabella believed that immediately. It sounded exactly like her grandmother. When his men finished, Sebastian asked where she wanted the extra wood stacked. Not where he thought best, where she wanted. A small question can reveal a whole creed. Isabella pointed to the south wall and watched him obey without performance. Before leaving, he placed a small pouch of silverleaf seeds on the gatepost. "Marsh sickness is bad this year," he said. "Plant them under windows." Then he rode away before gratitude could trap either of them. The first weeks became a war against neglect. Isabella rose before dawn, broke ice in the basin, and worked until her fingers shook. She cut thorn from the orchard. Roof beams had to be tested for rot and weakness. In the flower bins, she pulled mice nests free and found 3 jars of ancient honey sealed behind a pantry stone. On the 5th morning, a tenant from the lower hollow arrived with a broken plowshare and a face set for refusal. His name was Oren, and he had leased Mara's west strip before the manor fell empty. Grayhold agents had taxed him twice for the same poor field, once in barley and once in smoked hides. He expected Isabella to continue the theft because nobles rarely abandoned a profitable mistake. Isabella made him sit at the kitchen table while Sebastian leaned by the door and Beth pretended not to listen. She opened Mara's old ledger, compared the boundary marks, and found the false levy in less than 10 minutes. Oren watched her quill as if it might bite. "You owe 1 rent," she said, "not 2. The extra hides will count against spring seed." Oren looked at Sebastian. Sebastian looked at Isabella. "The decision is hers," he said. Oren left with the plowshare still broken, but his shoulders had changed shape. Sebastian came each morning unless border duty called him. He never arrived empty-handed. Some days he brought nails. Other days he brought a sack of oats, a coil of rope, or a quiet woman named Beth who knew how to smoke meat without wasting salt. He worked more than he spoke. That suited the manor, and slowly, Isabella. He did not ask about Richard. He did not ask why a noble woman with gray blood slept in a half-ruined house rather than under her father's banners. His restraint was not indifference. Isabella felt the attention in smaller things. A loose board fixed before she tripped on it, a draft blocked near her chair. Silverleaf planted beneath the windows after she mentioned rot wolves prowled the lower marsh. At sunset, he accepted 1 cup of honeyed ale and sat on the outer step. Brian watched him with suspicious approval. Sebastian's own wolf, Ash, lay beyond the gate and pretended not to watch Brian. The two beasts settled their diplomacy through glares. Isabella found herself smiling into her cup before she knew she had done it. Work made pain behave. It did not vanish, but it took a number and waited. There were fences to set, hinges to clean, and a chimney to seal with clay. Each task used the body. Each finished task argued against despair. Beth became the first woman Isabella trusted in the new land. She was broad-shouldered, sharp-tongued, and unimpressed by noble sadness. When Isabella lifted a beam wrong, Beth called her my lady fool and showed her the safer grip. Respect entered the manor wearing an apron. Sebastian remembered without announcing that he remembered. If Isabella said the well rope scraped, a new pulley appeared. If she mentioned liking tart berries, a cutting from Foster Hall arrived. He did not flood her with gifts. He built a pattern she could test. One evening, Isabella caught him watching her repair a ledger. She expected praise or teasing. He only said, "You hold a quill like a dagger." She answered, "It has drawn more blood." His slow smile stayed with her longer than it should have. Grayhold did not let her vanish cleanly. The first letter came in William's square hand. It said their mother was ill with sorrow. Emily's wedding preparations had become difficult because Isabella's sudden departure fed gossip. William asked her to return for the sake of family dignity. The word family appeared 4 times. The word sorry appeared nowhere. Isabella folded the letter and used it to light the stove. The flame caught slowly, then brightened. Beth saw and said nothing. Sebastian, who had come to mend a shutter, glanced once at the ash and returned to his work. No one told Isabella blood must be obeyed. The silence felt like a country she had never visited. The second letter came from Richard. It was sealed with black wax and smelling faintly of southern cedar. He wrote that matters had become complicated. Emily feared Isabella hated her, he claimed. Time, he hoped, would soften all hearts. At the bottom, he added one line in the hand she remembered from childhood. "I never meant to hurt you." That line nearly worked. Not because it was enough, because old love has hidden doors. Isabella stood by the well with the paper in her hand, remembering hawk feathers and warm vows, and a boy who had once carried her across a flooded ditch. Then she remembered his tent. Men often did not mean to hurt women when hurting them served an easier desire. She tore the letter into the well and watched the pieces darken. William's letters all shared one flaw. They spoke of consequences but never causes. In his version, scandal had bloomed by itself. Their mother suffered because Isabella left, not because the family demanded her erasure. Emily trembled because gossip was cruel, not because lies need darkness to breathe. Richard's letter used softer ink. He had always understood tone. He wrote like a man standing in rain outside a chapel window. The old Isabella might have opened the door. The new one noticed he still centered his own regret. After tearing his letter, she expected emptiness. Instead, she felt hunger. Not for him. For the years she had spent waiting to be chosen by someone already choosing himself. The well swallowed the pieces without drama. Water is wiser than halls. That night she told Sebastian only that old ghosts had written. He nodded. Some ghosts should not be fed, he said. Then he handed her a cup and spoke of seed prices until the room returned to the present. Sebastian's holding was smaller than Grayhold and better run. Foster Hall stood beyond the ridge, built of pale stone and red pine. Its people greeted him without fear. That startled Isabella more than grandeur would have. A shepherd argued about bridge repairs in the yard. A washerwoman shouted that the smokehouse roof still leaked. Sebastian listened to both and answered like their words mattered. He brought Isabella there to choose breeding hens and inspect a plow team he offered to lend. The villagers stared, of course. Northern people considered staring a form of weather. Yet no one bowed too low or whispered loudly enough to wound. An old man asked whether Lady Mara's apple press might be repaired by autumn. A child asked if Brian ate rude boys. Brian yawned at him. In the smithy, Isabella saw ledgers stacked beside horseshoes. Sebastian noticed her interest and handed them over. The accounts were plain, honest, and short on grain after 2 bad frosts. She found 3 errors before the iron cooled. Sebastian did not bristle. He asked what she would change. That question made her look up. At Grayhold, cleverness had become a threat whenever it shone brighter than a man's plan. Here, Sebastian treated it as a tool. She explained a rotation for the south field and a better toll on ridge timber. He listened with his whole face. By the time they rode home, Isabella felt more seen by a quiet neighbor than by the family that had named her. Foster Hall smelled of bread, dogs, saddle oil, and honest argument. No one fell silent when Sebastian entered. They made space, but they did not shrink. Isabella watched a lord who did not need fear to prove he was lord. The sight unsettled her in useful ways. In the hall, maps hung beside drying herbs. Children ran through with muddy boots until Beth cuffed one by the collar. Sebastian did not roar about dignity. He moved his papers away from the mud. Authority, Isabella saw, could bend without breaking. The ledgers revealed a hard land kept alive by care. No line was rich, no debt was hidden under pretty words. Isabella suggested shifting tax from seed grain to smoked hides for one season. A steward frowned. Sebastian asked him to show the objection in numbers. That became a real discussion, not a contest. When they rode back, Sebastian asked whether Grayhold had wasted her mind. The question was too direct. Isabella answered after a long while. It tried. He nodded once, as if accepting a battle report. It failed, he said. Freedom did not make the north gentle. Rot wolves came after the first thaw. They were not true werewolves, but ruined beasts, sick with marsh fever and old magic, their fur patchy, their mouths black. Isabella heard them before she saw them. Brian rose from sleep with a growl that made the floor tremble. The attack struck the rabbit shed first. Wood splintered. Snow flew. Isabella seized a spear from the wall and ran barefoot into the yard. The cold bit like teeth. 3 shapes moved beyond the fence. One leapt. She caught it under the jaw with the spear haft and went down beneath its weight. Sebastian arrived through the eastern gate like a storm given bones. Ash hit the second beast. Brine tore into the third. Sebastian dragged the first off Isabella and drove a silvered knife through its throat. For several breaths there was only snarling, blood steam, and the hard beat of Isabella's heart. When it ended, Sebastian reached for her arm, then stopped before touching. "Are you hurt?" She looked down. Her sleeve was torn. Her wrist bled where claws had grazed it. She should have said no. Pride rose by habit. Then she saw his face. Tight with concern, he refused to dramatize. "A little," she said. The next morning, a jar of bone salve sat on her table. No note, no speech, just the thing needed. Isabella held it for a long time. Gifts at Grayhold had carried hooks. This one carried use. That made it harder to dismiss. The rot wolves carried the stink of spoiled meat and bad magic. Their eyes shone green, not gold. Old stories said they were wolves who ate cursed carrion from battlefield pits. Isabella cared less about origin than teeth. Teeth were present. During the fight, the world broke into pieces. Snow, claws, Brine's roar, a spear shaft splintering, her own breath burning. There was no room for sorrow or memory. Survival is a narrow hall, but at least its rules are honest. Sebastian moved like a man trained by borders, not tournaments. No flourish, no wasted shout. He killed what had to be killed and checked what had to be checked. Isabella recognized competence before tenderness. Competence was easier to trust. The salve smelled of resin, bone ash, and wintergreen. It worked. More troubling, it proved he had noticed her wrist after she tried to hide it. Being seen had once meant danger. Here, it might mean care. That possibility frightened her more than the wound. News of Emily's wedding reached the manor with a spice trader. Richard Hawke had married Emily Gray in full right before the Southern Pax. The notice named her cherished bride, restored daughter, and future lady of Hawke territory. It did not mention Isabella. Erasure was the final courtesy of people who owed too much. The trader expected tears. Isabella asked the price of salt. He blinked, disappointed, and named a foolish number. She named a fair one. They bargained for 20 minutes while Sebastian repaired a harness nearby. Only after the trader left did Isabella sit on the chopping block and let her hands go slack. Sebastian did not offer comfort like a performance. He split 2 logs, stacked them, and said, A wound can close while still remembering weather. Isabella laughed once, not because it was funny, because it was true and awkward and entirely his. Then she told him about Richard. Not all of it. Enough. He listened without tightening his jaw for battle or pity. When she finished, he said Richard was a fool. Simple words, no poetry, no grand vow. The relief of that nearly undid her. At Grayhold, every harm had required debate. Sebastian named the wrong and let it stand. The notice had been copied by a bored clerk. Isabella could tell from the ink pressure. A clerk had written her erasure without knowing her name. That almost amused her. Great humiliations often travel through ordinary hands. Richard's public honor of Emily satisfied the condition. Isabella should have felt triumph. Instead, she felt the clean ache after a rotten tooth is pulled. The pain remains, but the poison has lost its house. When Sebastian called Richard a fool, he did not ask whether she had been foolish for loving him. That omission mattered. Women are often made to stand trial for trusting the wrong man after the man has already been convicted by his own actions. Isabella slept deeply that night. In a dream, she walked through Grayhold's hall and found it empty. No elders waited there. Her mother was gone. Richard was gone. Only her own footsteps crossed stone toward an open northern door. The trouble began with smoke. Isabella saw it from the manor ridge, a gray smudge rising beyond Foster Pine where no kiln should burn. By noon, a rider came with mud up his horse's chest and blood dried on his sleeve. Iron Ridge men had driven goats through a winter fence and claimed the stream below it had shifted the old boundary. Such claims always sounded like law until one noticed the armed cousins standing behind them. Sebastian listened without interrupting. Then he went to the stable and saddled Ash himself. Isabella brought out a packet of dried meat, a clean knife, and the small map she had copied from Mara's records. "The old markers are wrong on most tongues," she said, "but not on paper." He took the map with both hands. "If words fail," he said, "this may save blood." It was the closest he came to asking her blessing. She gave it by tightening the strap across his saddle. In late winter, boundary trouble pulled Sebastian east. A cousin from the Iron Ridge claimed grazing rights through Foster Pine. Men with old grudges love spring because melting snow reveals fences they pretend not to remember. Sebastian left before dawn with Ash, 4 riders, and an apology he did not overdecorate. "I may be gone 7 days," he said. Isabella told him the manor had survived worse than his absence. That was true. It was also not the whole truth. By the second evening, the yard looked too wide. On the 4th, the step where he drank honeyed ale seemed strangely empty. Before the 6th night ended, she caught herself listening for Ash's claws on frozen earth. She disliked the discovery. Waiting had once meant weakness. Waiting for Richard had trained her to accept scraps of attention and call them destiny. This was different, but her heart did not trust difference quickly. She repaired a fence post, counted seed sacks, and scolded herself each time she glanced toward the mist pines. That morning had tested Isabella before it rewarded her. A section of the west fence collapsed under thawing ice, and 3 borrowed sheep wandered toward the marsh where rot wolves had been scented 2 nights earlier. Beth was away at Foster Hall. Orrin had taken the plow team to the ridge. For 1 hard hour, Isabella stood alone in sleet with brine beside her and a coil of rope cutting into her palm. She did not wait for rescue. She drove stakes with a mallet until her shoulder burned, used a broken gate rail as a brace, and sent brine wide through the reeds to turn the sheep back. 1 ewe slipped into black mud up to its belly. Isabella went in after it, cursing so fiercely that Brine stopped barking and stared. By noon, the sheep were penned, the fence stood crooked but firm, and Isabella was soaked to the bone. Only then did she realize she had handled a crisis without asking whose permission made her capable. On the 7th dusk, snow began again. The flakes were large and soft, falling through violet light. Isabella stood in the yard with a lantern. She had come out to check the latch. That was the lie, she told herself. Brine sat beside her, looking smug in the way only wolves can look smug. Ash appeared first, dark against the trees. Sebastian followed, cloak crusted white, hair damp with melted frost. He stopped at the gate as if he had reached a border more serious than any land dispute. For once, words seemed to cost him. Isabella felt every unspoken thing gather between them. Absence revealed habit. She had begun setting out 2 cups without deciding to. The chair Sebastian favored faced both door and hearth. He disliked over-sweet ale and pretended not to like berry cakes. Knowledge had gathered quietly, like snow on a roof. On the 5th day, Beth caught Isabella looking toward the ridge. "Waiting for weather, my lady." Isabella gave her a look. Beth laughed so hard the hens startled. Servants in Grayhold would have hidden such laughter. Here it warmed the kitchen. He told the full tale only after Beth threatened to season his ale with willow bark until he stopped pretending the matter had been dull. The Iron Ridge cousin had arrived with 15 men, 3 goats as evidence, and a priest too frightened to read the boundary stones aloud. Sebastian made them all walk the line in freezing rain. At the first stone, the cousin laughed. At the second, his men stopped laughing. At the third, Sebastian unfolded Isabella's map and matched Mara's ink to the carved pine mark half buried under moss. The cousin reached for his sword anyway. Ash growled low enough to shake water from the branches. Sebastian did not draw. He asked the cousin whether he wanted grazing rights or a feud his children would inherit. Men who want to steal land often dislike being asked how much blood it is worth. By dusk, the goats were driven back over the ridge. By moonrise, Sebastian was riding home through snow with Mara's map dry inside his coat. The boundary dispute ended with no blood, which Sebastian later called a success and his cousin called a disappointment. Isabella heard the story from one of the riders. Sebastian had stood between 2 armed lines and made both sides recite the old markers until pride ran out of breath. When he appeared through the snow, relief moved through Isabella before pride could stop it. The feeling was not a chain, it was a lantern lit in a window. She let it burn. Sebastian opened the gate but did not cross the yard. "I will not ask what old territory hurt you," he said. "I have seen enough to know it was not small." His voice was rough from cold and travel. Snow clung to his shoulders. The lantern light caught in his silver-gray eyes. "If you choose to stay, I will guard this manor with you. Not above you, not around you, with you. I will mend walls, fight rot wolves, argue ledgers, and grow old under these pines if you want that life. If you do not, I will still honor Lady Mara's debt and leave your door untroubled." Isabella could have answered at once, but the past rose like smoke. She saw Richard asking her to yield. William stood again at the gate in memory. Her mother cried over the daughter who returned while cutting the daughter who remained. Then she looked at Sebastian, who had given help without ownership and patience without distance. "What if I never become soft?" she asked. He seemed puzzled. "Why would I ask the north to become summer?" The answer broke something closed inside her. Not loudly, not all at once. A quiet hinge moved, and a locked room opened to air. She crossed the yard. Snow soaked the hem of her skirt. Brine huffed behind her. Isabella placed her hand on Sebastian's chest, over the cold leather and the steady heart beneath it. "I will stay," she said. "But the manor is mine." His mouth curved. "Yes, and if you let me, the life beside it can be ours." Sebastian's offer held no grand rescue. That was why it reached her. He did not promise to erase her past, punish every enemy, or make pain useful for romance. He promised walls, work, years, and his place beside her. Those were things a life could stand on. Isabella searched his face for ownership. She found fear, but not of her strength. He feared asking too much. He feared stepping into ground still tender from old boots. The care in that fear undid her more than certainty would have. When she said the manor was hers, the answer in his eyes came before his mouth. Of course. 2 words, simple as bread. Richard had wanted her promise while reaching for Emily. William had wanted her sacrifice while calling it grace. Sebastian wanted her whole enough to choose. Their first kiss tasted of snow and smoke. It was not delicate. Both were cold, tired, and startled by happiness. Brine sneezed behind them. Ash whined at the gate. Isabella laughed against Sebastian's mouth, and the sound felt like thaw. A lesser wound might have faded there, but this one had roots. In proposal, the next break became visible. Spring came slowly, as northern spring always did. It did not arrive with flowers first. It came through roof drips, softer mud, swollen buds, and the sudden smell of earth under thawing snow. Isabella watched the manor change color day by day. Gray stone warmed, the well ran clear. The orchard, which had looked dead, offered tight green fists of leaf. Their wedding took place before the manor, not in a great hall. Isabella chose that. No elder who had nodded at her humiliation would bless her new life. No blood alliance would turn her vows into road rights. Neighbors came from mist pine farms, foster hall, charcoal huts, and lonely watch cabins. They brought bread, smoked trout, berry wine, mended benches, and gossip kept mostly kind. Sebastian wore dark wool and a silver clasp shaped like a pine bough. Isabella wore a white gown Beth had altered from her grandmother's stored linen. It was simple, warm, and hers. Brine sat beside the altar stone like an armed aunt. Ash sat beside Sebastian and looked insulted by the ribbons tied to his collar. The priestess bound their wrists with red thread and asked what each brought. Sebastian said, "My hands, my house, my wolf, and my years." Isabella said, "My land, my name, my counsel, and my choice." The word choice passed through the crowd like a blessing stronger than chant. After the vows, Sebastian led no formal dance. He looked as if he would rather face another boundary feud than circle a fire while neighbors clapped. Isabella saved him by asking Beth to begin with the children. Within minutes, the yard became noise, mud, smoke, and laughter. A little girl crowned Brine with a crooked wreath of pine needles. Brine endured it with the grim dignity of a queen tolerating fools. Near midnight, Isabella found Sebastian behind the smokehouse, repairing a bench that had split under two drunk cousins. "You are hiding," she said. He drove the peg in with one clean strike. "I am contributing." She laughed and held the lantern higher. The light caught the new ring on his hand. For a moment, neither spoke. The marriage felt less like a finish than a door opening onto years of work, and that steadied her more than any song. When they kissed, the wolves howled from the pines. The sound rolled over thawing fields and up into the pale sky. No one cried as if something had been stolen. No one whispered that Isabella owed happiness to another woman. For the first time in her life, a roomful of people witnessed her receiving instead of surrendering. Beth commanded the wedding like a field marshal. She sent boys for pine boughs, scolded bakers for thin loaves, and threatened rain clouds with personal violence. Isabella Litia. Some forms of affection need orders to feel comfortable. No one placed Emily's empty chair beside Isabella. No one mentioned Richard's name. The past had not been denied. It had simply not been invited to sit at the altar. That difference mattered. When Isabella spoke her vow, her voice did not shake. She promised truth before comfort, counsel before flattery, and loyalty without blindness. Sebastian promised shelter without chains, correction without contempt, and laughter whenever his nature allowed it. The crowd enjoyed that last line because everyone knew his nature allowed little. The feast lasted until moonset. Wolves ran around the firelight, their shadows huge against the trees. Human neighbors from the lower hamlet drank beside werewolves and pretended not to stare when noble guests shifted under the stars. For one night, the old boarders loosened. Their first serious quarrel came over the old mill. Sebastian wanted to rebuild the wheel before harvest. Isabella wanted the bridge repaired first, because children crossed it to reach the schoolroom. Beth had bullied the village into reopening. The argument lasted through breakfast, through the stable inspection, and into the yard, where both wolves lay down and watched as if humans were poor theater. Sebastian said a working mill would feed more families. Isabella said a drowned child would not care how much flour waded downstream. He went silent in the dangerous way of men who think silence is restraint when it is sometimes pride. Isabella left him there and walked the bridge herself. 2 boards cracked under her weight. By evening, Sebastian arrived with 6 men, a wagon of timber, and no speech. He set the first beam in place, then looked at her across the stream. "You were right," he said. She valued those 3 words more than any jeweled apology Richard might have offered. After the wedding, they joined the 2 holdings by more than vows. Sebastian opened the eastern lane between Foster Hall and Mara's manor. Isabella turned the neglected west field into barley ground. Together they planted northern red pines along the shared boundary, each sapling tied with wool until roots gripped deep. People joked the trees would outlive every argument. Isabella hoped so. She bought snow rabbits from a trapper's daughter and built hutches near the kitchen wall. Sebastian pretended not to understand why anyone would raise creatures that looked designed to escape. Then he carved better latches when 3 did exactly that. Every morning he left warm, honeyed ale beneath the eaves before riding out. Every morning Isabella found it and smiled where no one could tax the expression. Their marriage was not a song without weather. They argued over timber rights, seed debt, and whether Ash deserved kitchen scraps after stealing half a ham. Isabella had sharp edges. Sebastian had stubborn silences, yet neither used love as a court where one must kneel. If anger came, it sat at the table until named. Then work resumed. By autumn, berries bent the canes behind the manor. The repaired sheds held grain, tools, and 2 restless wolf pups from a tenant's litter. Children from Foster Hall ran errands through the lane and learned that Lady Isabella paid fairly, punished lying, and never mocked a small hand trying hard. That became part of her rule. Marriage made the work heavier and easier. He could lift beams she could not. She could untangle accounts he hated. He knew which ridge paths flooded first. She knew how to make 3 poor fields feed 5 villages by changing the order of labor. Partnership looked less like poetry than shared mud. The red pines became their private calendar. Each spring, new growth tipped the branches pale green. Each autumn, Isabella tied strips of cloth around the smallest trunks to spare them from deer. Sebastian said she fussed over trees. She said he fussed over horses. Both accusations were true. The worst storm came without moonlight. Snow sealed the shutters by dusk, and by midnight, a boy from the lower hollow beat on the manor door until his knuckles bled. His mother was in labor, he said, and the roof beam over their bed had cracked under snow. Sebastian was already reaching for his cloak when Isabella took Mara's old medical satchel from the pantry wall. Beth swore, grabbed blankets, and ordered the boy to drink broth before he fell over. They crossed the fields tied together by rope. Wind erased the path behind them. Twice Brine vanished into blown snow and returned with an offended bark, as if the weather had insulted her personally. At the hollow, Sebastian braced the roof with a wagon pole while Isabella and Beth worked beside the bed. By dawn, a girl child wailed beneath a patched roof, furious and alive. The mother named her Mara without asking permission. Isabella stepped outside and cried where only the storm could see. Their first winter as husband and wife brought storms that buried the lower fences. They dug out tenants, moved goats into the old wolf shed, and kept the hall open for travelers. Isabella learned that ruling well meant sleeping lightly. Sebastian learned that his wife could make exhausted men fear a missed soup ration. At night, after accounts and repairs, he brushed snow from her hair by the door. Sometimes they spoke of nothing important. Sometimes they spoke of children they might have, and children the world had already bruised. Isabella did not rush hope. Hope deserved better soil than desperation. Peace rarely goes unchallenged when old families mistake it for weakness. His arrival had been prepared by smaller intrusions. A gray scout asked questions at the charcoal village. A trader offered too much silver for news of Isabella's accounts. One morning, Beth found a stranger in the east lane measuring the distance between the manor wall and Foster timber. He claimed to be lost. Beth claimed her kitchen knife was sharp. He found the road quickly after that. Isabella answered by making copies. Deeds went to Foster Hall, to Frostmere Abbey, and to a widow named Sala, who ran the only inn between the ridge and the old Roman road. Sala had no noble blood, which made her useful. Men searching for documents often forgot women who poured ale and remembered faces. When William finally rode through the pines, Isabella had already moved the fight out of his reach. In the first hard frost after the wedding, William came north with 12 riders. His cloak bore the gray wolf. His face bore the look of a man forced to be polite where command had failed. Isabella met him outside the gate, Sebastian at her right, Brine at her left. William's news came dressed as concern. Their mother was failing. Emily's health was delicate after birthing a son. Richard's father had begun questioning the southern marriage contract because rumors still clung to the child's timing. Grayhold needed Isabella to sign a statement saying she had willingly yielded the betrothal before any impropriety. The lie would heal everything, William said. Isabella looked at her brother for a long moment. Snow gathered on his shoulders. He did not seem to notice. Men raised to inheritance often believe cold is something servants manage. She asked whether Emily was safe. William blinked. The question had not been in his prepared speech. "She is Richard's wife," he said. That did not answer. Isabella understood then that Emily had not won freedom. She had won the man she wanted and entered a house that counted dates. Richard had failed one woman through desire. He could fail another through resentment. Pity stirred in Isabella, but pity was not permission to be used. "I will not sign a lie," she said. William's nostrils flared. He warned that Grayhold could contest the manor deed. Sebastian shifted only once, a small movement of hand toward sword. Isabella touched his wrist. This was her blood, her boundary, her answer. "Try," she said. "Grandmother recorded the deed with 3 witnesses and the northern seal. I have copies in 2 halls and 1 abbey." William had expected the lonely sister he pushed through a gate. He found a landholder with records, allies, and a husband who did not speak over her. That discovery angered him more than refusal. "You have become hard," he said. Isabella smiled without warmth. "No, I have stopped being useful to those who confused softness with silence." William's riders looked uncomfortable beyond gray lands. Their horses disliked brine. Their cloaks were too fine for the thorn wind. Isabella watched them measure the repaired wall, the full woodpile, the smokehouse, and Sebastian's armed tenants. With every glance, their confidence thinned. Her brother tried warmth first. He called her Bella. The old name sounded worse in his mouth than in Richard's. Isabella corrected him once. "Lady Foster will do before witnesses." Sebastian's eyes flickered with approval, but he kept silent. William's request was clever because it wore Emily's suffering as armor. If Isabella refused, she could be accused again of cruelty. If she agreed, William would rewrite history and preserve his clean hands. The old trap had returned in better boots. This time no hall surrounded her. No mother sobbed at the dais. No elders leaned in for scandal. Her own gate stood behind her, repaired by her own labor. A woman answers differently when the ground under her feet belongs to her. The rider who carried it was not hawk-sworn. He was a kitchen boy with hay in his hair and terror in his scent. Isabella brought him inside, fed him stew, and let him warm his hands before asking questions. He said Lady Emily had given him the letter after midnight and paid him with a pearl earring. He also said Lord Richard had broken a cup against the nursery wall because the child cried during supper. Sebastian stood very still when he heard that. Isabella felt the same cold anger, but it no longer knew where to go. Emily had helped build the cage around herself. The child had built nothing. She sent the boy back with herbs, coin, and a warning to sleep in barns instead of roadside ditches. Then she sat alone with the letter until the candle burned low. 2 weeks after William left, a letter arrived without a seal. The hand was Emily's, though less graceful than before. It asked for no forgiveness at first. That made Isabella read on. Emily wrote of Hawk Hall, where every servant counted months. Richard drank more than he had in Grayhold. His father held the child and said nothing, which frightened her more than shouting. At the end, Emily wrote the truth plain. "I thought if I had your life, I would be safe. Being chosen, I thought, would heal what humans did to me. I did not care that I was stealing from you. Shame is mine now, but shame does not undo it. If you burn this, I deserve the smoke." Isabella read the letter 3 times. Anger did not vanish. It had earned its place. Yet the words changed the shape of Emily in her mind. Not innocent, not a monster, a wounded girl who learned to wound first and called it survival. That did not excuse her. It explained why her lies had been so hungry. Sebastian found Isabella by the orchard wall. She handed him the letter. He read it slowly, then gave it back. "What will you do?" Isabella looked toward the south, where Grayhold and Hawk Hall lay beyond forests, rivers, and choices already made. "I will not rescue her from the life she stole," she said, "but I will answer with the truth if she asks for it again." Emily's letter smelled faintly of milk and smoke. Isabella imagined her writing near a nursery hearth while listening for footsteps. The image did not soften the past, but it complicated revenge. Life is rarely kind enough to leave enemies pure. The apology mattered because it did not ask Isabella to perform comfort. Emily did not say she had meant well. Love, she did not claim, had made her helpless. She named envy, fear, and selfishness. Honest shame is still shame, but it can stop digging. Isabella considered sending money. Then she stopped. Money would invite hawk hands and gray assumptions. She considered sending nothing. That felt too much like her mother. The note did not stay one sentence. Isabella tried. She wrote, "Tell the truth sooner than you fear it," then sat with the quill above the page while the hearth burned low. At last she added 3 more lines. "Do not teach your son that love is proven by what women endure. Do not let Richard's shame become the child's weather. If danger becomes more than words, send the kitchen boy north again." She sanded the ink before she could regret the mercy. Sebastian read the note only because she handed it to him. He did not praise her for kindness or warn her against softness. He only asked which writer she trusted. That question let mercy remain hers. By morning, the packet was on the road south, wrapped in oilcloth against sleet. In the end, she sent a packet of herbs for nursing fever and a note with one sentence. "Tell the truth sooner than you fear it." Sebastian did not judge the note. He sealed the packet with plain wax and sent a trusted rider. His restraint gave Isabella room to be merciful without being managed. She loved him for that, though she only said the herbs must arrive dry. The reckoning came at midwinter council. They traveled there in a hard wind that turned every exposed cheek raw. The abbey road climbed through black pine and white stone, past frozen sheepfolds and graves marked with wolf jawbones. Sebastian rode beside her but did not crowd her path. Behind them came Beth with the document chest, Oren with 2 tenant witnesses, and old Nessa wrapped in so many furs she looked like a bundle of curses. Nessa had insisted on coming. "I want to see William Swallowpaper," she said. At the abbey gate, Richard's banner snapped beside Lord Hawke's. Isabella felt the old pain answer before she could stop it. Pain is not proof of desire. Sometimes it is only the body remembering where the knife went in. She dismounted, gave Brian's reins to Oren, and walked toward the white doors with Mara's key hanging beneath her cloak. Northern packs gathered at Frostmere Abbey to settle roads, marriages, grazing, and feuds before the deep snows locked everyone in place. Isabella attended as Lady of Mara's manor and Sebastian's mate. That title made several elders look twice. Some remembered nodding while William demanded her betrothal. Memory made poor eye contact. William petitioned first. He claimed the manor should revert to Grayhold because Isabella had abandoned family duty. Smooth words came easily to him. Custom followed, polished and selective. He praised Lady Mara while trying to erase her last will. Then he called Isabella grief-driven and vulnerable to Foster influence. The hall chilled in a way that had nothing to do with weather. Sebastian rose. Isabella caught his sleeve. He sat. A few men smiled, thinking she had silenced her husband out of fear. Then Isabella stood alone. She placed 3 documents on the abbey table: the deed, the witness record, and the blood bond release signed by Richard Hawke. She also placed Emily's letter beneath her palm, unseen but present. "My brother says I abandoned duty," she said. "I say duty was abandoned when a council asked one daughter to pay for another's secret." Murmurs started. She did not raise her voice. That forced them to lean in. No pup was named. No bed was named. Isabella named only the public facts: the forced request, the broken bond, the immediate Hawke wedding, and William's demand for a false statement. Lord Hawke was there, old eyes sharp as winter stars. Richard sat behind him, pale and silent. Emily was absent with the child. When Isabella finished, the abbey judge asked William whether he had sought a false statement. William tried to step around the word false. Isabella produced his letter. "Ink is a patient witness." The judgment was swift. Mara's deed stood. Grayhold's claim was dismissed. William was censured for coercive petition and forbidden to challenge the manor again. Lord Hawke, sensing where honor now lay, confirmed publicly that Emily was his son's lawful wife and the child his acknowledged grandson. Richard looked both relieved and trapped. That was not Isabella's burden. Their mother had sent a ribbon with him. It was blue, faded at the fold, and Isabella recognized it from her own childhood cloak. William held it out as if cloth could bridge everything his ambition had burned. For a moment, the girl who had wanted her mother's hand reached up inside Isabella's chest. That girl was not foolish. She had only been hungry. Isabella took the ribbon, not as surrender, but as evidence of a life she no longer had to beg for. "Tell her I remember it," she said. William's eyes sharpened with hope. Then she added, "And tell her memory is not obedience." He closed his hand around empty air after she walked away. After council, William waited by the cloister door. Snow fell beyond the arches. He looked older than he had at Grayhold, though only a year had passed. "Mother wants you to come home," he said. Isabella looked at him and felt the old ache move, then settle. "I am home," she answered. Frostmere Abbey had white walls and black doors. Wolves did not shift inside its court unless blood had been spilled on Abbey ground. That rule made politics feel almost civilized. Almost. Men can do great harm with clean hands and proper benches. William underestimated paper because he preferred voices. Voices could swell, shame, and charm. Paper waited. Paper remembered. Isabella had learned from Mara that records were a fortress for women surrounded by men who called memory emotional. When she stood, Sebastian folded his hands and looked at the table. He gave her the dignity of fighting her own named battle. That silence became visible. Even the Abbey judge noticed. A husband who trusted his wife to speak unsettled men who relied on speaking for women. Richard avoided her gaze until she mentioned the blood release. Then he looked up. For a moment she saw regret without performance. It came too late to matter. Some apologies arrive after the bridge has burned and ask to be praised for seeing smoke. The judge's ruling did more than protect the manor. It named coercion. Nobles hate names for their favorite tools. Once named, a tool cannot be used so easily in torchlight. William understood that. His anger smelled like iron and old fear. Every choice left a mark, even the quiet ones. In final reckoning, the next break became visible. Years later, people told the story badly, as people often do. They liked clean shapes because clean shapes asked little of them. Power in the packs moved through blood, but it survived through stories, and whoever shaped the story shaped the debt that followed. That was what Grayhold had tried to do to Isabella. They called theft mercy, coercion tradition, and silence family peace. She learned too late that a chain is easier to break once a woman stops arguing with each separate link. Some said Isabella Gray was the cold sister who gave away a prince and won a better lord. Others said Emily's tears had cursed Grayhold. A few claimed Sebastian Foster had rescued a rejected bride from ruin. Isabella corrected that version whenever she heard it. "He did not rescue me," she would say. "He stood beside the door I chose to open." Grayhold changed slowly. William became chief after their father died, but his rule carried a caution it had lacked before. Their mother never fully understood Isabella's distance. She wrote sometimes, mostly about illness, weather, and Emily's son. Isabella answered politely and rarely. Blood remained blood. It did not remain a chain. Emily survived Hawk Hall by growing less theatrical and more honest. She and Isabella never became the sisters poets would invent. Trust, once traded for advantage, does not return because regret knocks. Yet once each winter, Emily sent a small parcel north, dried southern peaches, a child's drawing, or a note with plain news. Isabella sent back rabbit wool, herbal salve, and no false warmth. The manor became known for fair measures and strong fences. Travelers found food there if storms caught them. Tenants found judgment without humiliation. Girls who had been told to endure too much found work, training, and a bed until they could choose their next road. Isabella did not call this charity. She called it remembering accurately. On clear nights, she and Sebastian sat beneath the red pines they had planted. Their trunks thickened year by year, holding the lane between two houses. He still spoke little. She no longer feared silence. Between them, it had become a place where trust rested without needing witnesses. Once, near the first snow of their 5th year, Sebastian asked whether she regretted yielding Richard. Isabella watched Brine's old silver muzzle gleam by the fire. She thought of the hall, the nodding elders, the brother who priced her pain, and the sister who mistook victory for shelter. Then she looked at the life around her. Smoke rising straight, rabbits warm in their hutches, red pines dark against stars, and a man who had never asked her to make herself smaller so he could feel kind. "No," she said. "I regret begging people to value what they were willing to spend." Sebastian took her hand. The fire cracked. Somewhere beyond the wall, wolves lifted their voices to the moon. That is the lesson the North keeps under its snow. Love that requires your erasure is not love. Family that feeds on your silence is not duty. A promise broken may hurt less than a promise kept by force. When a wolf is pushed toward the altar as payment for another's hunger, she may still turn, walk into the cold, build her own fire, and learn that the wide world can honor what one narrow hall refused to see. Isabella did not become gentle in the way songs prefer. She became fair. Fairness has a spine. It feeds the hungry and refuses the liar. It shelters the frightened and still locks the storehouse at night. People who wanted endless softness called her cold. People who needed justice called her lady. Sebastian aged into more silence, not less. Gray threaded his dark hair. The silver in his eyes stayed clear. He still left honeyed ale under the eaves, even in summer when she did not need warming. Habit can become a vow renewed without witnesses. Brian grew old and irritable, honored by every child who knew better than to touch her without permission. Ash died first, under the red pines, after a long run and a better meal than he deserved. Sebastian buried him himself. Isabella stood beside him because shared grief asks presence before speech. The first girl arrived before the manor had a reputation for shelter. Her name was Lena, a cooper's daughter promised to a widowed wolf twice her age because her father owed barrel wood to the wrong house. She came at dawn with one shoe, a split lip, and a marriage token clenched so tightly it cut her palm. Isabella did not ask for tears. She asked for names, dates, witnesses, and whether the token had been blessed before a priestess. By noon, Sebastian had sent a rider for the cooper. Beth had found Lena boots, and Isabella had written a petition that made the old wolf withdraw his claim before supper. The cooper came raging at sunset, then went quiet when Isabella placed his debt record beside Mara's measuring rod and asked which law allowed him to sell a daughter for timber. No one in the kitchen moved. Even the fire seemed to listen. He left without Lena. Lena stayed through winter, learned accounts from Isabella, and later opened the manor's first proper storehouse ledger for widows who traded wool, eggs, and smoked fish. The old wolf tried once to complain at Foster Hall. Sebastian asked whether he wished to make the failed bargain public before the abbey clerk. The complaint died there. For 3 nights afterward, Lena slept with the ledger key under her pillow, as if proof itself could keep watch. In spring, she laughed without covering her mouth. Word traveled after that, not as legend, as directions. When young women came to the manor with stories of arranged vows and smiling thefts, Isabella listened fully before advising. She did not tell them to run first. She asked what they owned, who witnessed what, where the roads led, and whether they were ready for cold. Freedom, she taught, needed boots as much as courage.